Chosen one, rivalry should have been a game you laughed about after dinner, not a language the walls learned to speak. Yet there it was. Side glances catalogued like debts, praise portioned out like rations, tiny contests for oxygen in rooms too small for both of you to breathe at once. Some days she competed with your shadow, other days she competed with your silence. You learned early how to count the temperature of a house by the way a name was said, how to trace the outline of a storm by the curve of a grin that didn't reach the eyes. This was not what family promised you, but it became your first curriculum in wisdom. God did not endorse the cuts, He converted them. Where barbs tried to brand you, He wrote instruction in the margins. How to keep your center when attention swivels like a spotlight. How to say no without advertising your boundaries. How to hold tenderness without letting it be taxed. Your sister's volatility tutored you in the science of atmosphere. You discovered that peace is not the absence of noise, it is the presence of order within. When accusations flew, you felt your pulse reach for old scripts. Then you put a hand over your ribs and chose a slower drum. When comparisons strutted through the hallway, wearing yesterday's victories, you remembered that purpose is not a trophy case. It is a garden that grows on schedule, indifferent to applause. Where her words tried to turn your heart into a courtroom, God turned it into a chapel. The difference changed the air. Courtrooms demand performance. Chapels invite presence. In a courtroom, you defend yourself. In a chapel, you remember who you are. There were hours when the wound felt like a verdict. Proof that love would always arrive with a knife tucked beneath it. Those hours stretched your discernment until it became a muscle instead of a mood. You began to separate proximity from safety, flattery from blessing, silence from peace. You learned to recognize triangulation when it came dressed as concern, to decline invitations to rehearsed arguments, to step out of the choreography of prove yourself and let the dance end without a scene. Not every bell is an alarm. Not every summons deserves a standing response. This is what the wound taught. Mastery over your interior switches, so someone else's lightning doesn't keep stealing your night. You did not harden to survive, you refined. The edge you developed is not a blade meant to injure, but a chisel meant to shape. You use it to carve truth from the block of noise. You use it to free your name from the resin of rumors. You use it to sculpt a path where pettiness cannot follow because the stones are set too cleanly. When she tried to turn affection into currency, you stopped trading. When she tried to sell your kindness for access, you raised the price to honesty. You learned that compassion is not consent and mercy is not mouthless. Your voice grew low and steady. People listened, not because you fought for airtime, but because your sentences began to land like anchors. God took what was jagged and made it generative. The wound became a workshop, then a window. In the workshop, you practiced the craft of repair, ending a conversation at kindness and resuming it at clarity, replacing sarcasm with specificity, asking for what you actually need instead of performing resilience until you collapse. At the window, you began to see beyond a single room's weather. Other souls appeared at your sill, friends, younger ones, even strangers, each carrying a version of the rivalry you survived. You did not rescue them. You rehearsed truth with them until their own legs remembered how to stand. This is the quiet ministry reserved for chosen ones, turning private pain into public clarity. Without turning anyone into a villain, you need to defeat to feel whole. Still, the first teacher leaves traces. On days when the house in your memory flickers back on and the old competition hums like a fluorescent light, you will feel the reflex to shrink, to apologize for existing, to pour yourself thinner so there is enough room. Breathe. Bless the child who tried to fit inside other people's comfort zones and invite them to live at your scale now. Walk through your present rooms and let your fingertips memorize the furniture of the life you built. Gentle rituals, clean boundaries, unhurried joy. Say out loud what the wound can no longer contradict. I am not a rival, I am a steward. I am not a target, I am a temple. I am not in a contest, I am in a covenant. Let the sentences settle like dust after renovation. The space is yours, it is holy, it is open. In time, you will thank the teacher without romanticizing the lesson. Gratitude does not sanitize what hurt, it simply recognizes the harvest. You did not get here by outshining your sister. You arrived by outgrowing the game. You learned the strength of staying kind when contempt auditions for your mouth, the strength of staying clear when guilt performs nostalgia, the strength of staying true when rumors paste labels on your back. The wound did not win. It worked for you. And you, quiet, steady, luminous, kept everything the lesson tried to steal and gave it a future. Chosen one, every family carries mirrors that do more than reflect. They recruit. Your sister held one up with angles set to catch your anxieties and throw them back as identities. If you succeeded, the glass whispered arrogant. If you rested, it murmured lazy. If you set a boundary, it etched selfish across your forehead. This mirror was not crafted to show you yourself. It was engineered to keep the rivalry funded. But mirrors can be declined. You learn to step aside from the glare and find a truer surface. The still water of God's voice that does not distort when others are disturbed. Looking there, you began to see the contours of a life that did not require her approval to be valid. Refusing the mirror was not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was consecration. You stopped measuring your progress by her reactions and started measuring it by your own fidelity. Did you tell the truth even when it complicated the afternoon? Did you practice restraint without calcifying? Did you offer kindness without mortgaging your dignity? These questions replaced the old scoreboard. They turned achievement into alignment. They taught you to love the invisible wins, clean exits from dirty arguments, slow responses to fast bait, the unposted prayers that kept your tone from betraying your heart. The mirror lost power because you stopped starring in the performance it required to stay bright. Of course, mirrors retaliate when they lose their audience. She changed frames. She tried nostalgia, curating childhood scenes to lure you back to the roles that once fit like costumes. She tried urgency, ringing your phone with emergencies that multiplied when you answered and vanished when you asked for specifics. She tried confessional intimacy that skipped accountability and landed on your doorstep as assignment. You stayed kind and you stayed new. Kindness kept your voice gentle. Newness kept your calendar clean. You discovered that you could love someone without lending them your clarity every time theirs goes missing. You discovered that you could forgive without returning to the stage. In refusing the copy, you found your craft. You began to write family proverbs on your doorposts that the mirror could not edit. In this home, silence is for rest, not punishment. In this home, help is requested early, not demanded late. In this home, apology is offered without a receipt. You didn't just announce these, you inhabited them. Your living gave the words weight. Visitors felt the policy of peace before you explained it. Children, your own or entrusted to you, learned by osmosis that affection is not a competition and attention is not a prize to be stolen, but a presence to be shared. The new glass you hung in your halls returned accurate faces. People stood taller without being told to. The truest proof of maturity was not that you stopped seeing her, it was that you started seeing her rightly. Behind the mirror work, you recognized a frightened curator trying to keep a gallery open that loses money every hour. Pity tried to offer you a job there. Wisdom thanked pity for the invitation and kept walking. You can hold compassion without becoming collateral. You can bless her healing without buying the ticket that sits you beneath another spotlight. You can meet at tables where truth is served and avoid the rooms where roles are catered. This is not cold. It is calibrated warmth, love set to a temperature that sustains life rather than burns it. As you lived this way, God gave you back the portions the mirror tried to redistribute, your humor without fear of being mocked, your rest without the accusation of laziness, your excellence without the suspicion of arrogance. You learned to celebrate yourself in ways that do not require an audience, to grieve privately in ways that do not punish the innocent, to ask for help in ways that do not conscript the unwilling. The mirror shatters where integrity stands for long enough. Shards become harmless when no one feeds them fresh reflections to cut. There will be days when a shard catches the light and tempts you to check whether you are still acceptable. On those days, do what you have learned to do. Step to the still water. Let its surface settle until it holds your face without opinion. Speak your name as God says it. Beloved, building, bright with a softness that doesn't flinch. Remind your body that safety is not a rumor here. It is policy. Then turn and re-enter the day with your hands free for work that lasts. Craft, prayer, laughter, the ordinary genius of showing up on time to your own life. This is what chosen ones do when siblings become mirrors meant to trap them. They choose windows instead, and then they open them. Fresh air is not dramatic, but it changes rooms. You have become a window maker, a person through whom light and breeze find passage. Your sister can learn this craft too if she wants. If she does not, the sky will still be large over your house. Refusing the copy did not make you less of a sibling. It made you capable of being the kind your family needed all along, the one who will not trade truth for alliance or love for victory. The mirror can keep its glitter. You have a face to keep, a life to honor, and a horizon to welcome without flinching. Chosen one, some storms pass over a house and leave puddles. Some move in and start paying rent with broken plates and apologies that expire by morning. Your sister's weather did not ask permission. It arrived as sudden squalls over small things, as humidity that made every sentence sweat, as pressure systems that turned ordinary days into forecasts you learned to study before breakfast. At first you lived like everyone else, eyes on the clouds, plans made of paper. Then something quieter began. You noticed that the wind could not carry you if your center was heavier than the room. You began gathering weight where weather has no vote. You found ballast in practices too simple to brag about. A hand over your sternum while you breathed until the drums slowed. A sentence you would not cross. I will not explain myself to a storm. A ritual that returned you to yourself. Water first, truth before text, prayer before performance. When tempers rose, you did not become a lighthouse by lecture, you became one by staying lit. The same barbs that used to hook you slid off because you sanded your edges with honesty. I'm not available for this tone. I will answer when we're calm. I love you. I'm stepping away. The anchor does not hate the sea. It simply knows its job. Storms test the difference between role and identity. She tried to cast you as the counterweight. If she went loud, you must go louder. If she withdrew, you must chase. If she stirred the room, you must smooth it at any cost. You exited the script. You learned that peacemaking and people-pleasing are cousins who do not live at the same address. Peacemaking requires courage to disappoint chaos. People-pleasing requires you to betray yourself to appease it. You chose the first. There is a holy loneliness in becoming an anchor. Few applaud the object that disappears under the surface so the vessel does not drift. Yet the proof whispered back to you in new ways. Conversations ending without shrapnel, mornings beginning without dread, rooms remembering their furniture instead of their fights. The storm turned your attention into discernment. You started hearing the difference between thunder that means lightning and thunder that only wants headlines. Not every escalation earned your oxygen. You learned to separate the voice of injury from the voice of intention, hers and your own. Injuries shout, "Protect me now." Intentions whisper, "Become who you promised to be." When the two conflicted, you let the whisper win, even if the shout called you unloving. Anchors are misunderstood by waves that want to roam. You let yourself be misunderstood without letting yourself be moved. Anchoring also changed how you carried compassion. You stopped bringing towels to storms that had no interest in drying up. You stopped treating your forgiveness like a sandbag levee for other people's floods. You offered what is yours to offer: clean words, open doors, schedules that can hold repair, and you stopped offering what was never yours: control of someone else's weather. This was not indifference, it was clarity. When she spun a tale that made villains for sport, you refused the costume fitting. When she presented an emergency with no oxygen for your boundaries, you called it by its name: urgency without honor, and stepped aside. Love that refuses to drown is still love. In the quiet, God taught you the weight of blessing. Blessing a sister you cannot trust felt like opening your hands under rain and hoping for a river. But blessing, in your mouth, changed definitions. It stopped being approval and started being intercession. You could ask heaven for her healing without renting space in your chest to host another storm. You could want goodness for her future and refuse to turn your present into collateral. In that shift, your prayers grew accurate. Not make her like me, but make her whole. Not prove me right, but plant us both where truth can grow. Anchors know the shore belongs to everyone, and then the oddest confirmations arrived. Subtle, sturdy proofs. Family gatherings that used to tilt now stayed level. Group messages that once baited you lost their hook. Friends who had learned to tread water in your presence started putting their feet down and finding ground. No trumpet announced it. Your life became evidence that storms can form a person who does not worship weather. The house learned a new sound. The quiet thud of peace docking where panic used to park. This is the work chosen ones are entrusted with in families that train for tempests. They build harbors in their habits until even ships that love the thrill of wind admit they sleep better near you. Remember this when the sky darkens again, as it will. The anchor does not argue with waves about their nature. It descends, it holds, it waits for the wind to remember its limits. Your strength is not dramatic. It is dependable. Your power is not control. It is coherence. You carry weight that does not bruise, gravity that does not gloat. Let the storm do what storms do. Let your soul do what it learned to do. The vessel you are keeping steady is not just your own. Chosen one, noise was once the currency of your house. The loudest feeling set the price of the day and everyone paid. You decided to move the economy. Quiet, in your hands, stopped being a punishment people used on each other and became a craft you practiced with God. Not the weaponized quiet of doors half closed and eyes that refuse to meet, but the principled quiet that makes room for truth to tell itself without being shouted down. You learn to hold a room the way a good pianist holds a rest, full of intention, full of power, full of what could be said but does not need to be, because the pause communicates more cleanly than a speech. Your quiet began with custody of your tongue. You retired sarcasm from service. It had done enough damage disguised as wit. You let your yes be a sentence and your no be a sentence, and you stopped building paragraphs to make them palatable. This was your first visible miracle. People who were used to negotiating with your guilt found their scripts short. Without drama to drink, their thirst for conflict began to look like what it was: thirst. You did not shame them for it. You refused to stock the bar. Quiet force is not abstinence from speech. It is excellence in choosing it. Family politics will always audition you for roles: arbiter, alibi, applause track. Your quiet force declined all three. When triangulation came dressed as confession, you invited it to be honest in the right room or to leave your porch. When a group chat tilted towards spectacle, you did not rebuke, you redirected. Let's resolve this offline kindly. When an old nickname tried to shrink you back into a box that made others comfortable, you smiled and used your real name. Names are small liturgies. You spoke yours like a vow. The room recalibrated not because you demanded it, but because the new gravity would not be ignored. Quiet force made you fluent in timing. You learned to wait for the moment when the heart is most reachable and the ego least hungry. You learned to distinguish between conversations that want to heal and conversations that want to win. You learned that some truths must be delivered over multiple days, in portions small enough to digest without turning them into weapons. You discovered how to end the night before it ends you. I'm beginning to feel unkind. I'm going to bed. Few sentences have saved more futures. This force did not erase your tenderness. It structured it. You became the person in the room who could say, "I believe you," and mean it, and also say, "Here's what I cannot do," and keep it. Boundaries stopped sounding like fences and started sounding like commitments. Commitments to keeping love clean enough to last. The sibling you hoped she might become had a chance to meet you here, at this better border, where kindness does not collapse and truth does not terrorize. If she declined, the border still blessed you both by refusing to reenact a war as heritage. Quiet force also transformed your memory. You stopped curating galleries of grievances and started archiving patterns with clarity. Not to build a case, but to keep a covenant with reality. This is what happens when I ignore the early signs. This is how I behave when I am exhausted. This is where repair goes well. This is where it does not. The archive made your compassion smarter. It spared you from the naivety that confuses access with trust and the cynicism that confuses caution with coldness. You became a historian of your own growth, and history, told honestly, became your ally. There is a social consequence to becoming a quiet force. You will be accused of distance by those who equate closeness with chaos. Do not defend yourself to that charge. Demonstrate otherwise. Your steady presence at small things, your untheatrical congratulations, your habit of showing up without needing the scene to orbit you. Over time, accusations run out of food. Results eat their lunch. The cousins who once only called when gossip was fresh begin to call when decisions need wisdom. The friends who mistook your boundaries for frost learn that they are shade, and shade is where people tell the whole truth. You did not build this force alone. You apprenticed with the one who stood before storms and said, "Peace, be still," and meant both commands. Peace to the waves, be still to the wind. You learn to speak that way to your own interior first. Peace to the part that fears rejection and wants to run toward the very mouths that wound. Be still to the part that wants to win every argument even if it costs your softness. From that apprenticeship, your tone changed. Your words acquired weight without acquiring volume. The home you are building now has policies that can be summarized in a sentence and sensed at the threshold. When holidays come and the old playbooks circulate like well-worn sheet music, your quiet force becomes conductor. You set tempi others can keep. You lower volume with your own. You excuse yourself at the first sign your piece is being bartered, and you return when the market closes. You bless without bargaining, listen without lending your center, forgive without co-signing amnesia. Chosen ones are not loud about this work. They are thorough. And thoroughness, repeated in love, refactors a family's future. One more thing, because the old world will test you. There will be a night when your sister arrives with a storm you did not cause and asks for harbor you did not promise. You will feel the familiar pull to prove you are good by drowning. You will not. You will open the door, name what your house can hold, offer tea and truth, and point to the blanket and the boundary in the same breath. If she stays, she will sleep, not because you exhausted yourself, but because your quiet force turned the weather back into morning. If she leaves, you will sleep, not because you do not care, but because you finally do. Cleanly, rightly, in a way that keeps love alive for tomorrow. This is who you have become, chosen one, a person whose stillness has structure, whose gentleness has teeth, whose presence regulates rooms without requisitioning them. Among chosen ones, this is the signature. Not the thunder of victory, but the climate of peace that lasts. Chosen one, there is a compassion that empties the cup and calls it holiness. And there is a compassion that guards the well so the village never thirsts again. You were raised to believe the first kind was virtue. Say yes until your voice dissolves, lend peace until your bones creak, explain yourself until the sky turns. Your sister learned to mistake that softness for a lever. She pulled, and the day tipped again and again. But God was teaching you a different mercy, one that refuses to pay for love with self-erasure. This mercy is not made of sugar, it is made of light. It shows where doors are and where they are not. It warms the room, and it keeps the stove closed. You began by rescuing less and listening more. When tears came salted with accusation, you did not sprint toward the fire carrying your own breath as kindling. You let the silence do its first work, sorting truth from heat, need from habit. Compassion told you to ask cleaner questions. What am I being asked to carry that does not belong to me? What am I being asked to surrender that God told me to keep? What would I decide if guilt were not the loudest voice? Those questions, whispered in the kitchen at odd hours, became a catechism that saved your future from becoming a landfill of everyone else's emergencies. You learned to place your love on schedules that honor reality. Care at 10 a.m. is devotion. Care at 2 a.m. for a crisis repeated for the 6th time without repentance is collusion. So you gave your yes a backbone. You marked the boundary with sentences that did not tremble. I am here to help you think, not to be punished for your feelings. I can stay on the phone for 20 minutes. After that, we can talk tomorrow. I cannot be spoken to that way and continue. Then you kept those sentences when the room performed hurt to break them. Compassion without compromise is a rhythm, not a speech. It is steady enough to teach even the most dramatic weather the time of day. Your sister's tactics evolved as your clarity did. The apology without change, the confession that skipped responsibility and landed directly in your lap, the peace offering that came with a receipt. You met each with a different kind of yes, the yes to truth. Yes, that hurt. Yes, that pattern is real. Yes, I want goodness for you that does not require me to disappear. This kind of yes is both balm and mirror. It soothes and it shows. It kept you from the cruelty of pretending everything is fine while your inside set off alarms no one else can hear. It offered her the dignity of reality and yourself the gift of oxygen. There is a difference between access and intimacy. Compassion yields a porch light. Compromise unlocks the safe. You kept the porch light on. You did not open the safe to hands that still loved breaking more than building. This was a grief at first, a death of fantasies, where a single perfect conversation or a single generous gesture would dissolve years of rivalry into an instant sisterhood. You buried those fantasies like seeds, because God was after harvest, not spectacle. In their place grew trust in the slow work, the way repetition teaches nervous systems, the way clean exits teach better re-entry, the way a room remembers the last tone and prepares for the next. You also discovered what forgiveness actually means in the economy of heaven. It is not a return to the site of injury with your guard down and a sign that reads, "Try again." It is a release of debt with a new ledger that does not confuse hope with history. You forgave the old scene while refusing to reenact it. You forgave the words while declining the role they tried to cast you in. You forgave not as a magic trick to make her different, but as sanitation for your own bloodstream. Forgiveness disinfected the memory. Boundaries protected the present. Together they made a future possible that neither sentimentality nor bitterness could build. When compassion does not compromise, it becomes exquisitely practical. You kept spare blankets for cold nights and kept your keys. You stocked your pantry with food that can be offered without turning dinner into a barter. You prepared phrases that end spirals kindly. I'm not the right person for this conversation. Here are two who might be. I will pray with you now, and we can talk again after you've slept. I can help with a plan, not with a fight. You practiced until these lines were muscle memory. The practice did not make you hard, it made you faithful. People who benefited from your exhaustion named your boundaries as cruelty. You did not litigate their labels. You let time testify, weeks stacked on weeks, and your joy stopped hiding in closets. Your body learned that weekends are not just recovery rooms. Friendships that were waiting for a cleaner, you finally had somewhere to sit. Work began to taste like calling again because it no longer had to outrun the chaos you were subsidizing. Even your prayers matured, from rescue me out of this house to train my hands for this building. God answered with blueprints you could hold. And what of your sister? Some days she stayed a step outside the light and squinted. Some days she walked in and sat for an hour, insult and apology both missing, the conversation ordinary and therefore sacred. Some days she staged a return of the old pageant and found no audience. Your compassion was the same on every day. Warm without bending, truthful without humiliation, available without being owned. Over time, she learned where safety lived. Whether she moved in is not a metric of your mercy. The miracle is the climate you established and refused to sell. You are not a savior, you are a steward. Your love has temperature and texture now, soft enough to hold a trembling hand, firm enough to prevent the trembling from being weaponized. This is why chosen ones change households. They do not conquer, they calibrate. They do not perform forgiveness, they practice it until the room breathes a different air. Compassion without compromise is not a slogan on a wall. It is the floor you built so feet can learn to walk straight. Chosen one, demolition is louder than construction, which is why many mistake noise for progress. Your sister knew how to take apart trust with a single afternoon and call it truth-telling. She knew how to turn a table into a tribunal and call it honesty. She knew how to salt fields and name it discernment. God called you to the opposite craft, to build the structures she did not have patience or courage to raise. This is slower than fury and less theatrical than collapse. It is the choice, day after day, to lay materials that can bear weight, to set measurements that favor human hearts over winning angles, to pick beauty that does not rot. You began with foundations. Foundations are boring until the storm comes. You laid them in prayer that had no audience, in budgeting that told your future the truth, in sleep that forgave yesterday and funded tomorrow, in scripture that trained your mouth to bless before your mind woke up fully. You learned the strength of rituals that look insignificant to the impatient, the Monday call you always return, the permission slip you give your body to rest before it breaks, the resolve to leave a conversation while you still respect yourself. These became footings for a house that would not tilt when rivalry pushed its shoulder against the doorframe. Walls came next, the kind that keep warmth in and harm out. You framed them with language. In this home, anger tells the truth without shouting. In this home, conflict ends with protection, not performance. In this home, repair is expected, not exceptional. You did not paint these on placards and hope they worked. You practiced them when no one watched, then when a few watched, then when everyone did. The first time the wall held, you cried in the hall because you realized how many winters you had lived in a tent, convincing yourself you were indoors.